Today, I want to switch things up a bit and stop lamenting about the future of software development and the never-ending AI hype cycle. I think we all need a break from all the doom and gloom and focus on some actual solutions. So in this Monday morning review, we'll try to put things into perspective and understand how software professionals can still provide value now that code generation is actually really cheap. And we'll do it by discussing the watch industry. I know this sounds crazy, but please stay with me, because I believe this video is much more relevant to us than any news regarding AI models or security threats. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about our future, and I believe that software developers need strong technical skills, but we clearly have to also expand our knowledge into other fields. There is this quote I really like from the novel Time Enough for Love. A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, and die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. And if you think about it, we've seen this transition from specialists to generalists in the software industry for quite some time. Sure, you had your React front-end developers or specialized DBAs here and there, but the most valuable employees in a tech company were those who could manage the whole stack, from implementing UI components to building REST APIs and then manage the deployments as well. Moving forward, we just need to add some more skills on top of what was already expected from a senior software developer. And Paul Graham explains this shift really well in one of his recent articles. He tells the story of the Swiss watch industry in the 1970s, when the whole thing almost collapsed because of quartz watches. For decades, Swiss watchmakers had been competing on precision. The best watches were expensive because they were genuinely hard to make. They were thin, accurate, beautifully engineered little machines, and if you bought an expensive mechanical watch in 1960, you were basically buying jewelry able to accurately keep time. But then quartz happened, and suddenly, keeping accurate time became cheap. If you are not a watch enthusiast, just know that mechanical watches rely on tiny springs, gears, jewels, screws, levers, and an escapement to keep time. A normal mechanical movement can have well over 100 parts, while a more advanced one can end up having several hundred moving components, each manufactured, adjusted, and assembled with absurd precision over weeks or months. A quartz watch, on the other hand, uses a battery and a small quartz crystal that vibrates at a very stable frequency. In other words, a mechanical watch is a tiny machine, while a quartz watch is basically a tiny electronic circuit. What's important to note is that a cheap quartz watch could do the main job of keeping time far better than the finest mechanical movement. On top of that, it was thinner and easier to manufacture. And once the core function became cheap, the entire basis of the old industry collapsed. I'm sure this sounds really familiar if you spent the past year closely following tech news, and most of us probably feel just like those Swiss watchmakers that spent decades perfecting a game that no longer mattered. Because for a long time, writing code was perceived as one of the most expensive parts of building a software company. Of course, code is tangible, so people could easily calculate its cost. But I would argue that finding product market fit, understanding your customer needs, and building an actual profitable business are much more expensive. The code is visible, so we obsess over its cost, but the real cost is usually hidden in everything that has to happen before and after the code is written. But now code generation is cheap enough that the value of a developer can no longer be reduced to simply a human who writes syntax into a text editor. And this is where the watch story becomes interesting. The Swiss watchmakers who survived did not survive by trying to directly compete with quartz watches, because that battle was already lost. In order to survive, they had to adapt and change their perceived value. Mechanical watches stopped being precision instruments and became luxury objects. They are now expensive little reminders that humans will always find a way to turn obsolete technology into a personality trait. But the lesson is not that we should become luxury brands. Please do not start describing yourself as an artisanal full-stack engineer crafting REST experiences for exclusivist enterprise clients. That might sound like an actual LinkedIn job description, but it'll take you nowhere. The better lesson is that when the core commodity changes, the valuable work moves somewhere else. For watches, the core commodity was accurate timekeeping. Once quartz made that cheap, the value moved to brand, scarcity, identity, and status. For software, the core commodity is basic code production. So the value moves to understanding problems, designing systems, making trade-offs, understanding customers, shaping products, managing complexity, and knowing what should not be built in the first place. I want to emphasize this last idea. As someone commented in one of my past videos, when answers are cheap, the questions are all of a sudden much more valuable. AI can help you generate code faster, and it will gladly let you burn through your entire budget, even though what you are building is pointless, the business process is broken, the user does not care, the database model is wrong, or the team is addressing the symptom instead of the root cause of the problem. This is where we can still provide enormous value. A valuable developer now needs to understand the product, the business model, design, distribution, operations, security, performance, compliance, support, and cost. Not necessarily as deep specialists in all of those fields, because that would be insane, but enough to connect the dots. And this is probably the uncomfortable part. Many developers, me included, build their identity around being technical specialists because that made sense for a long time. But when implementation gets cheaper, narrow implementation knowledge becomes less defensible on its own, and the value shifts toward people who can operate across boundaries. Remember the full stack versus React developer parallel. The developer who understands engineering and product is more valuable than the developer who only waits for perfectly refined tickets. And the watch industry gives us a pretty concrete example of what this kind of adaptation looks like. But before looking at that in more detail, please let me tell you a few words about today's sponsor. Design is a big part of building a brand, and Mobin helps over 2 million product designers, product managers, UX researchers, software engineers, and founders find highly relevant references to their design problems. It provides highly detailed breakdowns of every screen in thousands of popular applications, so you don't have to waste hours taking thousands of screenshots, digging through Dribbble, or guessing what a good dashboard should look like. You can analyze entire user journeys, UI elements, and screens from over 1,200 highly successful web and mobile apps to research your competition effortlessly, discover best practices, and stay up to date with the latest trends. They also just launched an MCP server that connects agents to more than 600,000 real app screens directly from your favorite AI provider, so your agents stop suggesting those generic bleak interfaces that scream AI generated. When using LLMs on UI design, your inputs determine your outputs. The more grounded your references are before you prompt, the better your results. Please check out the link in the description to find out more about Mobin. Back to the video, Swiss companies that survived did not just sit around arguing that mechanical watches still have better craftsmanship, while Japanese companies were selling cheaper and more accurate quartz watches to everyone with a wrist. To be fair, some of them tried that. Omega, for example, responded in the most engineering-brained way possible. They tried to make better and more accurate movements, and they even tried to compete in quartz, but that was the wrong battlefield. Once timekeeping had become cheap, competing on timekeeping was a race to the bottom, and Omega eventually became insolvent. Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet took a different path. They realized that if they could no longer win on raw performance, they had to change what people were buying. And this is where the design of watches changed in a very visible way. Before the quartz crisis, many high-end mechanical watches looked relatively similar. They were small, thin, elegant, and understated. The brand name was printed on the dial, but in a subtle manner. That was fine when the value was inside the watch, but once the value moved to brand, the brand had to become visible. So Patek Philippe launched models like the Golden Ellipse, where the case itself became part of the identity. Audemars Piguet launched the Royal Oak in 1972, and then Patek followed with the Nautilus in 1976. These are top-of-the-line watches still admired to this day. So the value of a watch shifted from telling time accurately to signaling the brand on your wrist. This sounds ridiculous, but it worked. As a result, the industry kept pushing further in that direction. The advertising changed, the designs became more recognizable, and the brands leaned harder into heritage, hand finishing, limited production, and exclusivity. Eventually, some of the most desirable models became difficult to buy even if you had the money. You had to join waiting lists, build relationships with dealers, buy less desirable models first, and basically prove that you are worthy of being allowed to purchase a very expensive object. This is insane when you think about it. 50 years ago, these were the obsolete products of a dying industry, and now, 50 years later, people jump through hoops to get the opportunity of buying a $20,000 watch, which keeps time worse than a $20 Swatch watch. This shows how completely the business had changed. In 1960, an expensive watch was expensive because it was one of the best compact timekeeping machines humans could manufacture. Today, an expensive mechanical watch is expensive because it carries brand, scarcity, history, status, and a story about craftsmanship. The quality still matters, but it matters differently. Of course, a luxury mechanical watch still has to be good enough and still has to keep reasonably accurate time. But it no longer has to beat quartz on accuracy, because accuracy is no longer the thing selling the watch. And I think this is the part that maps best to software. When a core capability becomes cheap, quality becomes the default expectation. With watches, mechanical quality no longer sold a product by itself, but bad quality could still destroy the brand. With software, code quality may stop being the main thing companies pay for, but bad code can still destroy the product. So as a developer, you still need real technical competence. If you want a brutal, real-world example of what happens when we treat code like a cheap commodity, just look at the research from GitClear. They analyzed over 150 million lines of commercial code to see what's actually happening to repositories, since everyone started leaning on AI assistants and the data doesn't look good. For the first time in software history, the amount of copy-pasted, duplicated code has completely overtaken refactored or moved code. Refactoring has dropped from 25% of code changes down to less than 10%. Instead of doing the hard work of consolidating logic and building reusable modules, developers are just hitting tab and letting AI generate a one-keystroke template of redundant parallel code paths. This might look like an absolute explosion of productivity, but in reality, it's a ticking time bomb of technical debt. So, yes, trust me, you still need to understand architecture, databases, security, performance, maintainability, testing, deployment, and all the boring things we've been doing for the past 20 years. But this technical competence is now the baseline. The higher value work moves into knowing what to build, why to build it, how it fits into the business, how it affects users, how it will be maintained, and what trade-offs are acceptable. So there you have it, a technical video about watches on a software development channel. Now, you can say you've seen everything. And before wrapping things up, here is your awesome trivia of the day. The trap of trying to out-engineer a structural shift is not unique to watchmakers, and Nintendo actually did the opposite with the Game Boy. In the late 1980s, Atari and Sega were chasing better handheld hardware with color screens, stronger processors, and flashier specs. In response to these powerful devices, Nintendo released a gray brick with a monochrome screen, no backlight, and modest hardware. One of Nintendo's key designers had a philosophy called lateral thinking with withered technology, which basically means use old, cheap, reliable technology, but use it in a clever way. The Game Boy looked worse than its competitors, but it was cheaper, tougher, and had far better battery life, and that was enough to make it a household name. What Nintendo understood is that a handheld console was not supposed to win a specification battle. All it had to do is be affordable, portable, durable, and fun. And this lesson maps really well to software. A better stack does not automatically mean a better product, and more features do not automatically mean more value. Sometimes the smartest technical decision is to use boring technology and solve the real problem. If you liked this video, you should consider joining our community where I'm posting more dedicated content. Please don't forget to smash all the buttons, and see you in the next one.